let's talk about prison hustles, what they are and why they're important. So I spent 19 years in the Virginia Department of Corrections, and I was really lucky, both because one, I had support from the outside, and two, Virginia is one of the states that pay their prisoners for the work they do. So I made between 27 and 45 cents an hour, whereas some states, you spend 8 hours in the fields all day, you don't get paid anything. So I had different jobs over the years, but the problem is that there aren't enough jobs for everybody. I was at a camp of 1,100 people that had 400 jobs. So even if you want a job, even if you're required to have a job because of your treatment plan, and if you don't have that job, you're going to get in trouble and you're going to lose good time, it doesn't change the fact that there aren't enough jobs. So when you come in and you want to work, or you want to do something, that's not always a possibility. So having a hustle is a good idea. And some people come in and say, oh, well, I sold drugs on the street. I'll just come in here and sell drugs. Okay, it's a little bit different. Same principle, same idea, but you have a very limited pool of resources. So if you corner the market on something that somebody else had the market cornered on, you're going to have a lot more conflict. That's why the majority of the violence and the majority of the issues in prison are behind drugs and gambling and money. So if you go into a kind of a saturated field, or you go in to provide something that's going to create conflict, yeah, you may be able to hustle and make money, but it's not necessarily a good idea. That's why when guys come in and they say, oh, well, what should I do? So-and-so said he'd pay me to hold his dope, or so-and-so said he'd pay me to push his tobacco. I usually tell guys, like, look, if I were you, I wouldn't do it. I understand why, but I would not advise it because, one, you're trying to change your life, and two, it's just rife with conflicts, and you don't need that. So the hustles that you can do are the ones that are built around something that's established. Now, yeah, you could theoretically go push tobacco for the guy who's established with tobacco, but the problem is if somebody else gets on and then there's a conflict, you're caught in the middle of it. But the guys who run parlays, which is like a gambling organization, or do stuff from the kitchen, or do whatever, it's not a saturated field. Like, you're always going to have a bunch of parlay men, you're always going to have a bunch of people doing tattoos, you're always going to have a bunch of these options. Now, some of these things, like tattoos, they require a lot of skill. Like, you have to be good. You mess somebody's tattoo up, like, that's going to create conflict in itself. But if you can work for the tattoo man, if he says, hey, I need you to get me paper for this, or I need you to get me, patterns, or I need you to collect me deodorants because I use deodorants to put the patterns on. All these little different things that you could do could be a side hustle. Or you get with the parlay man and he says, hey, I need somebody to write tickets. I'll pay you $3 a day, or $5 a day, or $10 a day. Well, considering the state's going to pay you 27 cents an hour, $5 a day sounds pretty good. Like, that's a lot better than you're going to get for the state. And all you have to do is write the tickets. And yes, there is some, threat of getting in trouble for writing tickets or gambling paraphernalia, but it really depends on the institution. Most of the places I worked, they were not worried about gambling paraphernalia because they had a lot bigger problems, and they realized, what I'm going to get to later, is that the more hustles you have, the more peacefully the prison runs. So you can write tickets for him, which means you get the lines or he gets the lines. And actually, that's a hustle in itself. If you just have somebody on the street who's willing to look it up for you, you can be the person who gets the lines for the parlay man. So you call home and you say, hey, what are the lines on all these games? What are the over-unders? What are the final scores? What are the halftimes? You write them all down. You give it to him. He might give you $2 a day or $4 a day. Well, that phone call only costs you 82 cents. And if your person's willing to do it on the street, that $4 a day is really nice because, again, that's a lot more than you're going to make with a legitimate state job. But then he takes that information and he gives it to the ticket maker. He said, all right, this is a line I want for all these tickets, so I want you to do Chicago +3 against whoever, or this over under, 110. You write all the tickets out, you do it on carbon paper, so you make several copies, you cut them up, you hand him the whole stack of tickets, then he hands it to the next guy whose hustle is to be a runner. He has all these tickets, he has to turn them in, and at the bottom of every ticket is a stub. So what you'll do is a ticket will, I'll do this another time to give you more information, but every ticket will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 going down the ticket. So if you want to pick like Chicago +3 and that's at the top left, that's going to be number 1. If you want to pick the other team, that would be number 2. So you put your numbers on the stub, like 1, 7, 15, 14, whatever. Then you hand him the stub. He's going to take that and take that to the parlay man. So you got to hand him the stub with the money. So all the ticket runner does is hand the tickets out, collect them with the money, and then hold it for the actual parlay man. And then at the end of the day, you either bring them all the stuff, but you got to make sure you bring them all the stubs. And a lot of times what they'll do is they'll let you hold the money, and then you can kind of swap that out. And that's one of the big benefits. Because if people give you really good stuff, well, you've got $2 on the ticket. It doesn't say you have $2 in this or that. You can put some stamps on there rather than food, unless you're specific about like what's good and what's bad. Because in prison, something you can actually eat or actually use is more valuable than something you can't. So nobody wants stamps, and people pay $3 in stamps for $2 in food, or $4 in soap for $3 in stamps. Like, it's kind of crazy the way that works. But it allows you to be in a position to kind of flip things. And then you could even be the guy who helps the parlay man. You just do the little errands for me. You're the one who works on the trash crew. And you pick up the food from, the guy who ran the tickets in this pod and bring it to his pod. You put it in the trash can, you bring it there. All these little things allow money to flow. Because the biggest problem is when money doesn't flow, you have conflict. Because just like the situation where you have limited resources for the guys selling drugs, if everybody has something and nobody has something, there's a problem. But if there's like a flow, because the drug man is giving it to different people to hold, he's giving it to different people to sell, he's giving it to different people to whatever, and that money is then spreading back out. But again, if somebody's selfish, if a parlay man doesn't play other parlays, if a drug man doesn't spend his money with other hustles, if people don't spread the money they make around, that creates conflict because nobody likes somebody who collects all that money. But if that money moves around, that means, hey, the guy who runs the tickets can make money. The guy who helps the tattoo man can make money. The tattoo man himself can make money. The guy who brings food out of the kitchen and gives it to 5 different guys to distribute can make money. So the money is spread out. It's like a little economy where everybody gets a chance to make a hustle. Whereas if you don't have any prison hustles and not everybody has a job, you have this guy who gets commissary and 10 guys over here are real hungry and have no way to get any food. What do you think is going to happen with a bunch of people who are in prison? Well, that's why hustles are important. And I had a discussion with this, strangely, with the operations manager of a prison I was in, where I said, look, I know y'all want to get rid of tobacco. Okay, that's great. That's a policy. If I were you, I wouldn't push those rules. And they said, well, why? What do you mean? And I explained this to them, that if somebody can be pushing tobacco, and somebody can be pushing tickets, and somebody can be pushing stuff out of the kitchen, and somebody can be pushing tattoo stuff, at the end of the day, that helps the prison, and that helps everybody in it, because money keeps flowing, that's fewer conflicts, and that's fewer issues. Now, I understand the issue with the drugs, because again, you have a lot of money involved, you have a lot of conflict involved. I understand why they try to tamp down on that, in addition to the fact that drugs are one of the main reasons that people are in prison, and if we don't address the addiction issues now, we're not going to address them, and people are going to get out and do the same things. So that's the one hustle that I understand why they attack, and I think it makes a legitimate sense. But the minor hustles, and even like tobacco shouldn't be a big deal, it just is because there's so much money in it now. You know, gambling, tattoos, food out of the kitchen, all these other little things, they allow people to spread the money around. But additionally, sometimes people just learn how to hustle. And one of the biggest things is, if you look at a prison full of drug dealers, what you actually have is a prison full of salesmen. We just don't realize that. So rather than selling drugs, if they were selling advertising, or they were selling, tech leads, or they were selling something else, you have a room full of amazingly skilled salespeople. And if we can transition them to something legitimate, that helps. So sometimes, like my buddy Billy, who ran parlays while he was inside, that's how he paid his bills, that's how he ate his food, that's how he did everything he did. He basically provided for himself. And by doing that, he learned to hustle. Now he's out here, he was buying and selling stuff on Craigslist and at estate sales, and he was buying and selling stuff at pawn shops. Now he owns his own pawn shop. He's been out of prison for less than 3 years. He owns and operates a pawn shop. He does sales all over the country. He's getting ready to travel internationally with his wife. Like, he's doing a great thing because he learned a skill. Because people say, oh, well, you need to learn, you need to get your GED, you need to learn plumbing, and those things are great, and I think they're important. Additionally, some people make it in the world by hustling, and it doesn't have to be an illegal hustle. It can be buying, baseball cards from this guy's estate because nobody wants to deal with it, and then realizing you got 10 times what you paid for. Or it can be, hustling and buying whatever, but realizing that you have that skill, learning how to hustle, learning how to do that in a productive and a safe way that's legal, is essentially transforming somebody from a good criminal to a good citizen. Because that same person is going to pay taxes. That same person is going to then carry their story to other people. There are the examples of the kid growing up of like, hey, well, I could hustle drugs and make a bunch of money but end up in prison. Or I could go for this guy and I could hustle bonds. I could hustle whatever. I could hustle advertising. And when people realize that, when they realize it's the same skill set and they can actually provide the same things just in different form, all of a sudden we have a bunch of people getting out of prison, contributing to the world rather than taking away from it. So that's why prison hustles are important both for people while they're in prison as well as when they're out.